Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Tinamine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gaurvangi Pracharine Nirvisesha Shunyavadi Paschatadishatharine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Radha, Radha Radhe. Jaya Radha, Krishna Radha, Krishna Radhe. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Gurudev Maharaj Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Maharaj Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai. Page 1, please. Introduction. Om Ajnanati Mirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadadi Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha. He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrinda Vrindeshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya eva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Shalina Mataji.
Hare Krishna. I was born in the darkest ignorance, and my spiritual master opened my eyes with the torch of knowledge. I offer my respectful obeisances unto him. When will Srila Rupa Goswami Prabhupada, who was established within this material world the mission to fulfill the desire of Lord Chaitanya, give me shelter under his lotus feet? I offer my respectful obeisances unto the lotus feet of my spiritual master and unto the feet of all Vaishnavas. I offer my respectful obeisances unto the lotus feet of Srila Rupa Goswami, along with his elder brother Sanatana Goswami, as well as Raghunatha Dasa and Raghunatha Bhatta, Gopala Bhatta, and Srila Jiva Goswami. I offer my respectful obeisances to Lord Krishna Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda, along with Advaita Acharya, Gadadhara, and Srivasa, and other associates. I offer my respectful obeisances to Srimati Radharani and Sri Krishna, along with their associates, Sri Lalita and Vishaka. O my dear Krishna, You are the friend of the distressed and the source of creation. You are the master of the gopis and the lover of Radharani. I offer my respectful obeisances unto you. I offer my respects to Radharani, whose bodily complexion is like molten gold and who is the queen of Vrindavana. You are the daughter of King Vrishabhanu, and you are very dear to Lord Krishna. I offer my respectful obeisances unto all the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. They can fulfill the desires of everyone, just like desire trees, and they are full of compassion for the fallen souls. I offer my obeisances to Sri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Sri Advaita, Gadadhara, Srivasa, and all others in the line of devotion. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Shalina Mataji. Just going to share my screen now quickly. Okay, last week, where did we stop? Did we do verse 35? We did verse 35, did we?
No, Mataji, we need to start with verse 35.
We need to start. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So then that would be, yeah. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Preyan Swadharmo Vikunnaha, Paradharmat Swa Anushtitat, Swadharma Nidhanam Shreyah, Paradharmo Bhayavaha. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Oh, it is far better to discharge one's prescribed duties, even though faultily, than another's duties perfectly. Destruction in the course of performing one's own duty is better than engaging in another's duties, for to follow another's path is dangerous. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. One should therefore discharge his prescribed duties in full Krishna consciousness rather than those prescribed for others. Materially, prescribed duties are duties enjoined according to one's psychophysical condition under the spell of the modes of material nature. Spiritual duties are as ordered by the spiritual master for the transcendental service of Krishna. But whether material or spiritual, one should stick to his prescribed duties even up to death, rather than imitate another's prescribed duties. Duties on the spiritual platform and duties on the material platform may be different, but the principle of following the authorized direction is always good for the performer. When one is under the spell of modes of material nature, one should follow the prescribed rules for his particular situation and should not imitate others. For example, a Brahmin who is in the mode of goodness is non-violent, whereas a Kshatri who is in the mode of passion is allowed to be violent. As such, for a Kshatri, it is better to be vanquished following the rules of violence than to imitate a Brahmin who follows the principles of non-violence. That's it, sir. Okay, so this verse here, we are advised strictly to follow our own duties. Is that the end of the purport? Or did I miss something in my copying and pasting?
One more paragraph to
I did, yeah. Okay, so it's not on my screen already from my book, right? Such, for a Kshatri, it is better to be vanquished following the rules of violence than to imitate a Brahmin who follows principles of non-violence. Everyone has to cleanse his heart by gradual process, not abruptly. However, when one transcends the modes of material nature and is fully situated in Krishna consciousness, he can perform anything and everything under the direction of a bona fide spiritual master. In that complete stage of Krishna consciousness, the Kshatri may act as a Brahman, or Brahman as a Kshatri. In the transcendental stage, the distinctions of the material world do not apply. For example, Vishwamitra was originally a Kshatri, but later on he acted as a Brahmin, whereas Parshuram was a Brahmin, but later on he acted as a Kshatri. Being transcendentally situated, they could do so. But as long as one is on the material platform, he must perform his duties according to the modes of material nature. At the same time, he must have full sense of Krishna consciousness. So Prabhupada is saying here, do your duties in whichever ashram you are situated in. But in doing your duty, you must be fully Krishna conscious. And in that way, you will be doing your duty properly. You'll be executing your duties properly in the best manner possible. The examples Srila Prabhupada draws here of sage Vishwamitra and Parshuram are from Ram Katha. They were great sages in Lord Ram's Leela, Lord Ram's pastime, right, from the Ramayana. And sage Vishwamitra acted as a Kshatri at some point, and although he was a Brahmin, and Parshuram acted as a Brahmin, although he was a Kshatri. But because they were transcendentally situated, unlike us, they could move between the different ashrams. It is recommended to remain in our ashrams, but execute everything in a Krishna conscious manner. Okay, who's reading next? Shalina Mataji, you want to try? This will be verse 36. 36. Arjuna Vacha.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Arjuna Uvacha. Atakena prayukta yam papam charati purusha anichan api Varshneya balad iva niyojita.
Yes.
Arjuna said, O descendant of Rishi, by what is one compelled to sinful acts, even unwillingly, as if engaged by force? Purport: a living entity as part and parcel of the Supreme is originally spiritual, pure, and free from all material contaminations. Therefore, by nature, he is not subject to the sins of the material world. But when he is in contact with the material nature, he acts in many sinful ways without hesitation, and sometimes even against his will. As such, Arjuna's question to Krishna is very sanguine as to the perverted nature of the living entities. Although the living entity sometimes does not want to act in sin, he is still forced to act. Sinful actions are not, however, impelled by the supersoul within, but are due to another cause, as the Lord explains in the next verse. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Shalina Mataji. So you see, Arjuna is asking Krishna now, what makes a person do these sinful activities, even though they don't want to do it? It's like a driving force that's pushing you to do it. Now, Krishna is going to answer this question of Arjuna in the next verse. But here I want to draw to your attention in Srila Prabhupada's purport as it's highlighted up here on the screen. Prabhupada says, but when he is in contact with material nature, he acts in many sinful ways without hesitation and sometimes even against his will. So you may not want to do something sinful, but there's a driving force from within. And this is what Arjuna wants to understand now, right? So let's see what Krishna says. So we move to the next verse. Veronica Mataji, verse 37, please. Verse 37. Who's reading? Madhuri Mataji, you reading?
I'll try, Mataji.
Okay, thank you.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Shri Bhagwan Uvacha, Kama Esha, Krodha Esha, Rajo Guna Samyudbhava, Mahasano Mahapapma Vidhi Ima
Enam.
Ita Veriyam.
Erinam. Thank you.
The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "It is lust only, Arjuna, which is born of contact with the material mode of passion and later transformed into wrath, and which is all devouring, sinful enemy of this world." Purport: when a living entity comes in contact with the material creation, his eternal love for Krishna is transformed into lust. In association with the mode of passion, or in other words, the sense of love of God transformed into lust, as milk in contact with sour is transformed into yogurt. Then again, when lust is unfound, it turns into wrath. Wrath is transformed into illusion, and illusion continues the material existence. Therefore, lust is the greatest enemy of the living entity, and it is lust only which induces the pure living entity to remain entangled in the material world. Wrath is the manifestation of the mode of ignorance. These modes exhibit themselves as wrath and other corollaries. If, therefore, the mode of passion, instead of being degraded into the mode of ignorance, is elevated to the mode of goodness by the prescribed method of living and acting, then one can be saved from the degradation of wrath by spiritual attachment.
Okay,
The
thank you,
Supreme
Mataji. We
Personality.
can stop here, Haribo. We can stop here. Let's just discuss a little bit, Mataji. Thank you. Okay, so Krishna answered Arjun's question. He said that it is lust only, Arjuna, which is born of contact with material mode of passion. So we understand now that lust is in the mode of passion. Krishna speaks of three modes of material nature, namely goodness, passion, and ignorance. Lust falls in the category here, according to Krishna, in the mode of passion. And what does lust do now? It becomes a sinful enemy, right? So then again, when lust is unsatisfied, it turns into wrath. Wrath is transformed into illusion. We are placed into illusion now, Maya, where we mistake unreality for reality. Okay, it's like the perverted image of the spiritual world that we are living in now. That's how our consciousness is then placed. Okay, Veronica Mataji, you wanted to read as well that time, I think. Do you want to carry on reading the purport? Then you can have a turn, Veronica. Haribol, Veronica Mataji here. Okay, I'm just going to, okay, let me read the rest of this purport. The Supreme Personality of Godhead expanded in himself into many for his ever-increasing spiritual bliss, and for the living entities are parts and parcels of the spiritual bliss. They have also partial independence, but by misuse of their independence, when the service attitude is transformed into the propensity for sense enjoyment, they come under the sway of lust. See, Prabhupada is saying here, so they misuse their independence that Krishna has given. Krishna has given us independence, right? Us human beings, we have our intelligence and all of that which comes from him. And it's also giving us our independence, because we desire that independence to act and enjoy separately from Krishna, right? So now when he gives us this independence, what happens? When the service attitude is transformed into the propensity for sense enjoyment, then we start wanting to enjoy our senses. And from here, this lust arises. So this material creation is created by the Lord to give facility to the conditioned souls to fulfill these lusty propensities. And when completely baffled by prolonged lustful activities, the living entities begin to inquire about their real position. Because there's only so much a living entity can take. Yes, you want to enjoy separately, you want to enjoy your senses. There's only so much sense enjoyment you can do. So you get to a point, the living entity gets to the point where he is completely baffled and dissatisfied, because no matter how much of material opulence and facilities one has, it's just never enough and doesn't bring happiness. And when the living entity reaches that stage, then he starts inquiring. Who am I? What am I doing here? Where do I want to go to? What is my goal in life? How do I reach my destination? All these questions arise. So this inquiry, Prabhupada says here, this inquiry is the beginning of the Vedanta Sutras. We spoke about that last week as well, right? The summary, the cream of the Vedas, Vedanta Sutras, wherein it is said that Ahato Brahma Jignasa, one should inquire into the Supreme. And the Supreme is defined in Srimad Bhagavatam as Janmadi Asya Yato Navyad Iti Ratascha. Or, this is what it means. The origin of everything is the Supreme Brahman. Therefore, while the origin of lust is also in Supreme, if therefore lust is transformed into love for the Supreme or transformed into Krishna consciousness, or in other words, desiring everything for Krishna, then both lust and wrath can be spiritualized. Hanuman, the great servitor of Lord Ram, exhibited his wrath by burning the golden city of Ravana, that is Lanka, right? But by doing so, he became the greatest devotee of the Lord. Here also in Bhagavad Gita, Lord induces Arjuna to engage his wrath upon his enemies for the satisfaction of the Lord. Therefore, lust and wrath, when they are employed in Krishna consciousness, become our friends instead of our enemies. So what Prabhupada is saying here, anger can be used in a spiritual sense. Arjuna used his anger, his wrath to fight this battle. Hanuman used his wrath to burn the city of Lanka. We said they are aggressors, right? We spoke about 6 aggressors at some point. And one of it is one who burns down another's house. Hanuman burnt down many houses when he burned down Lanka. But he is not considered an aggressor because he did it in service of the Lord. He did it to an enemy of the Lord, who was Ravana. He burnt Lanka because Ravana himself was an enemy, was a demon, and was opposing religious principles. Ravana was opposing religious principles. He was opposing the Lord. He was the enemy of the Lord and his devotees. So in that instance, where Hanuman burnt down the city of Lanka with his tail, that kind of wrath, Prabhupada says here, was not incorrect. Instead, he became the greatest devotee of the Lord, the greatest servant of the Lord. Okay. So let's discuss a little bit. I put a few points here earlier on. Yeah. So lust, we know, is an emotion or a feeling of intense desire where? In the body. And we know that the body is material. So therefore, lust is placed on a material platform. And lust can relate to any aspect of material nature. You can have lust over food. You can lust over knowledge, over power. All these things are symptoms of lust, not just lust between man and woman. But lust can still be cleansed, right? It can be cleansed how? By spiritual knowledge. And the nice analogy is used here by Krishna, by Prabhupada, that just like a mirror full of dust can be cleansed, lust can be cleansed by spiritual knowledge. Now, Arjuna asked Krishna what impelled a person to act sinfully, and Krishna replied in the verse 37 that we read, said, Kama Esha, lust drives a person to act sinfully and turns it into anger when not satisfied. And what happens when we get angry? We get deluded. We don't think clearly. And when we don't get deluded, we become bewildered. And then we fall. Right? So people who are materially attached are prone to enjoying their senses, and as a result, they tend to be lustful. Those who are materially attached. Therefore, we encourage everyone to get spiritually attached and engage their senses in serving Krishna. If you're going to serve your senses on a material platform, you get lustful. And from this, we attract karma on different levels. In society, we come across cases where serious crimes, even like murder, take place. Why? Due to lust. We're always reading these articles in the newspaper. We listen to it in the news, where there are relationship problems and people are being unfaithful. One spouse is unfaithful, so the other spouse goes and kills their spouse's lover. Or there was even a case once, I remember a long time ago, where somewhere in India, these parents scaled a wall of a school, or I don't know, university or something, to steal exam papers, just so that the child excels, to get the answers, the questions beforehand. So that's lustful over knowledge, false knowledge, right? Now, if we be lusty over material knowledge, there's not even called lust anymore. It's now lust transforms into love for Godhead, because you are desiring for something spiritual. If you desire for something material, it's lust. Right. So let's move on to verse 38. How are we doing for time? We're okay. Who wants to read verse 38?
Okay, I can read.
Okay. Verse 38.
Verse 38. Karma Yoga. Is that Karma Yoga? That one, okay?
338. Yeah. Chapter 3, verse 38.
Okay.
Domena Brijyate.
Oh, okay. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Dumena Vrityate Vahi Vanir Yadha Darso Malena Cha Yato Bina Vrito Gharvash Tata Dentham Avritam. As fire is covered by smoke, as a mirror is covered by dust, or as the embryo is covered by the womb, the living entity is similarly covered by different degrees of this lust. But there are 3 degrees of covering of the living entity by which his pure consciousness is obscured. This covering is but lust under different manifestations, like smoke in the fire, dust in the mirror, and the womb above the embryo. When lust is compared to smoke, it is understood that the fire of the living spark can be a little perceived. In other words, when the living entity exhibits his Krishna consciousness slightly, he may be likened to the fires covered by smoke. Although fire is necessary where there is smoke, there is no overt manifestation of fire in the early stage. This stage is like the beginning of Krishna consciousness. The dust in the mirror refers to a cleansing process of the mirror, of the mind, by so many spiritual methods. The best process is to chant the holy names of the Lord. The embryo covered by the womb is an analogy illustrating a helpless position, for the child in the womb is so helpless that he cannot even move. This stage of living condition can be compared to that of the tree. The trees are also living entities, but they have been put in such a condition of life by such a great exhibition of lust that they are almost void of all consciousness. The covered mirror is compared to the birds and beasts, and the smoke-covered fire is compared to the human being. In the form of a human being, the living entity may revive a little Krishna consciousness, and if he makes further developments, the fire of spiritual life can be kindled in the human form of life. By careful handling the smoke in the fire can be made to blaze. Therefore, the human form of life is a chance for the living entity to escape the entanglement of material existence. In the human form of life, one can conquer the enemy, lust, by cultivation of Krishna consciousness under able guidance. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Veronica. Okay,
Thank
so
you.
Prabhupada made it quite clear here and used some nice analogies as well. But look, Krishna, we talk about analogies and everything, but it's all coming from Krishna. We say that intelligence comes from Krishna. Krishna is all intelligent. That's one of his opulences. Look how Krishna speaks in Bhagavad Gita. Look at the analogies he uses in his speech to Arjuna. As fire is covered by smoke, as mirror is covered by dust, or as embryo is covered by the womb, the living entity is similarly covered by different degrees of lust. It all comes from Krishna. And man today thinks he's so intelligent with his vocabulary and writing the Oxford Dictionary and all of that. All comes from Krishna. It all originates from him. See? Okay, so Prabhupada goes on to say, explains it to us nicely here, and he says how we get rid of lust is by spiritualizing our activities, and the best process is to chant the holy names of the Lord. Right. And towards the end here, he says again, therefore the human form of life is a chance for the living entity to escape the entanglement of material existence. So we should not waste this human form of life. We are given this body with all this intelligence and senses so that we can transcend very quick. Okay. So we go to verse 39. Anybody want to read? Anybody else want to read? Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Avritam jnanam etena jnanino nityavarina kamarupena kaunteya duspurena nanalena cha. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Thus, the wise living entity's pure consciousness becomes covered by his eternal enemy in the form of lust, which is never satisfied and which burns like fire. So Prabhupada says in his purport, it is said in the Manusmriti that lust cannot be satisfied by any amount of sense enjoyment, just as fire is never extinguished by a constant supply of fuel. We spoke about Manusmriti last week, isn't it? Touch base on that. It says the law book of man for man. So in the material world, the center of all activities is sex, and thus this material world is called Maitunya Agara, or the shackles of sex life. Shackles, we are bound. In the ordinary prison house, criminals are kept within bars. Similarly, the criminals who are disobedient to the laws of the Lord are shackled by sex life, because this is the greatest binding factor in material life, right? Advancement of material civilization on the basis of sense gratification means increasing the duration of material existence of a living entity. Therefore, this lust is a symbol of ignorance by which the living entity is kept within the material world. While one enjoys sense gratification, it may be that there is some feeling of happiness, but actually the so-called feeling of happiness is the ultimate enemy of the sense enjoyer. A lot of people who are ignorant of spiritual life will say, I'm enjoying my life. I love my life. I'm talking about people on the material level now who say that they enjoy it. But what are they really enjoying? They're enjoying sense enjoyment. And what we know about sense enjoyment, it's never enough, because the more you get, the more you want. Nice analogy Prabhupada uses is fire. Fire is never extinguished if you carry on adding fuel. When there's a problem, people say, oh, look, he is adding fuel to fire. So he's giving some sort of input that will make the situation worse. Likewise, the material, the lusty desires that we have get more and more and more in depth if we carry on feeding our senses on the material level. That's what it is in a nutshell. Right. So now, what time is it? 1:45. We can do another verse. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Indriyani mano buddhir asyati sthanam uchyate, etar vimoha yati yesha jnanam avritya dehinam. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Paramatma Prabhu, you want to read for us, please? Paramatma Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Hare Krishna. The purport.
Okay.
The translation and then the purport.
Okay.
The senses.
Okay, Hare Krishna, text 40. The senses, the mind, the intelligence are the sitting places of this last. Through them, last covers the real knowledge of the living entity and bewilders him. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The enemy has captured different strategic positions in the body of the conditioned soul, and therefore Lord Krishna is giving hints of those places, so that one who wants to conquer the enemy may know where he can be found. Mind is the center of all the activities of the senses, and thus when we hear about sense objects, the mind generally becomes the reservoir of all ideas of sense gratification. And as a result, the mind and the senses become the repositories of lust. Next, the intelligence department becomes the capital of such lustful propensities. Intelligence is the immediate next door neighbor of the spirit soul. Lusty intelligence influences the spirit soul to acquire the false ego and identify itself with matter, and thus with the mind and senses. The spirit soul becomes addicted to enjoying the material senses and mistakes this as true happiness. This false identification of the spirit soul is very nicely explained in the Srimad Bhagavatam 1084:13. Yasyatma buddhi kunapi stri tanuke savadi kaladratishtu pome ijyadi yatirta buddhi salile na kahitchich janeshva avigneshu saeva kara. A human being who identifies this body made of three elements with his self, who considers the byproducts of the body to be his kinsman, who considers the land of birth worshipful, and who goes to the places of pilgrimage simply to take a bath, rather than meet men of transcendental knowledge there, are to be considered like an ass or a cow. Thank you, Mataji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu. Okay, so Prabhupada explains nicely here as well. Krishna says here the senses, the mind, and intelligence sitting places of lust. So this is where lust sits, right? It sits in the mind, then moves to intelligence. Okay, the senses, then the mind, and then moves to intelligence. So you must be careful of the mind. See, Prabhupada says here, mind is the center of all activities of the senses. The mind will tell you, the senses will move with it. So be careful of that. Right, let's go to verse 41. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Tasmat tvam indriyani adho niyamya bharatar sabha papanam pari prajahi enam jnana vijnana nashanam. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Okay, so therefore, O Arjuna, best of Bharatas, in the very beginning, curb this great symbol of lust by regulating the senses and slay this destroyer of knowledge, and self-realization. So boldly Krishna is saying lust destroys knowledge and self-realization. What is self-realization? Realizing yourself, being the soul in relation to Paramatma, in relation to God. So if you have lust, it's going to destroy that. It's going to hinder your spiritual progress. Purport? The Lord advised Arjuna to regulate the senses from the beginning so that he could curb the greatest sinful enemy, lust, which destroys the urge for self-realization and specific knowledge of the self. Jnana refers to knowledge of the self as distinguished from non-self, or in other words, knowledge that the spirit soul is not the body. That's jnana, right? That's knowledge. Vigyan refers to specific knowledge of the spirit soul's constitutional position and his relationship with the Supreme Soul. It is explained thus in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Jnanam parama bhuyam me yad vijnana samanvitam sa rahasyam tad agnanam cha grahan ghana gatitam maya. Papa continues. Explanation of the verse that we read. The knowledge of the self and supreme self is very confidential and mysterious. But such knowledge and specific realization can be understood if explained with their various aspects by the Lord himself. So Bhagavad Gita gives us that general and specific knowledge of the self. So the Lord is explaining himself in Bhagavad Gita. Gives us the knowledge of self and gives us the general and specific knowledge of the self. The living entities are parts and parcels of the Lord, and therefore they are simply meant to serve the Lord. This consciousness is called Krishna consciousness. So from the beginning of life, one has to learn this Krishna consciousness, and thereby one may become fully Krishna conscious and act accordingly. Lust is only the perverted reflection of the love of God, which is natural for every living entity. But if one is educated in Krishna consciousness from the very beginning, that natural love of God cannot deteriorate into lust. When love of God deteriorates into lust, it is difficult to return to the normal condition. Nonetheless, Krishna consciousness is so powerful that even a late beginner can become a lover of God by following the regulative principles of devotional service. So, from any stage of life or from the time of understanding its urgency, one can become one can begin regulating the senses of Krishna consciousness, devotional service of the Lord, and turn lust into love of Godhead, which is the highest perfectional state of human life. Highest perfectional state is to turn lust into love of Godhead. If you've got love of Godhead, it's the highest stage, and that in itself will take you back home, back to God. So devotees, we've got 2 more verses to finish this chapter. Shall we proceed? Because we've got 7 minutes and we've still got Nishinga there for now. Can I get your input, please? Yes, no?
Yes, happy to proceed from here, Mataji.
Okay. Right, no objections? Then let's proceed. So 342.
No
Veronica,
objection, Mataji. Thank you.
thank you. Veronica, Mataji, you want to read 42 for us, please?
Oh, okay. Okay, I'll read. Okay. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Indriyani parani ayud, indriye bhakya param manaha, manasa shashtu parabhutit yo buddhiha parastastu saha. The working senses are superior to dull matter. The dull matter, mind is higher than the senses. The intelligence is still higher than the mind, and the soul is even higher than the intelligence. Purport: the senses are outlets for the activities of lust. Lust is reserved within the body, but it is given vent through the senses. Therefore, the senses are superior to the body as a whole. These outlets are not in use when there is superior consciousness or Krishna consciousness. In Krishna consciousness, the soul makes direct connection. Therefore, the hierarchy of bodily functions as described here ultimately ends in the supreme soul. Bodily action means the functions of the senses, and stopping the senses means stopping all bodily actions. But since the mind is active, then even though the body may be silent and at rest, the mind will act as it does during dreaming. But above the mind is a determination of the intelligence, and above the intelligence is the soul proper. If therefore the soul is directly engaged with the Supreme, naturally all other subordinates, namely the intelligence, mind, and senses, will be automatically engaged. In the Katha Upanishad, there is a similar passage in which it is said that the objects of sense gratification are superior to the senses, and the mind is superior to the sense objects. If therefore the mind is directly engaged in the service of the Lord constantly, then there is no chance that the senses will become engaged in other ways. The mental attitude has already been explained. Param Visva Nivar Tate. If the mind is engaged in the transcendental service of the Lord, there is no chance of it being engaged in the lower propensities. In the Katha Upanishad, the soul has been described as Mahan, the great. Therefore, the soul is above all, namely the sense objects, the senses, the mind, and the intelligence. Therefore, directly understanding the constitutional position of the soul is a solution of the whole problem. With intelligence, one has to seek out the constitutional position of the soul and then engage the mind always in Krishna consciousness. That solves the whole problem. A neophyte spiritualist is generally advised to keep aloof from the objects of the senses. But aside from that, one has to strengthen the mind by use of intelligence. If by intelligence one engages one's mind in Krishna consciousness, by complete surrender unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then automatically the mind becomes stronger, even though the senses are very strong. Like serpents, they will be no more effective than serpents with broken fangs. But even though the soul is a master,
Dr. Mataji is muted now. Veronica, you done? Okay, let's go back here. So now, Prabhupada explains nicely in this purport what the latter part is saying. So what we're saying here is what Prabhupada is saying, what Krishna is saying, that we've got intelligence. We must engage this intelligence properly. Intelligence must dictate to the mind. As soon as the mind desires to do something incorrect, something sinful, something lusty, the intelligence must come into the picture and say, hey, mind, hold on. What are you doing? This is not what we are meant to do, right? So in that way, the intelligence can strengthen the mind. And the mind then will be like serpents, and the senses will become like serpents without those fangs, without the poison, and cannot cause any destruction, right? And even though the senses are very strong like serpents, they will be no more effective than serpents with broken fangs. That's what Prabhupada is saying. Okay, so Prabhupada explains here also that the body has 5 working senses. What are the 5 working senses? Prabhupada says is hands, legs, tongue, rectum, genitals. And by taking full advantage of these working senses, the bodies enjoy material life. So we got 43, which is our last verse. And read through quickly. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Evam buddhi param buddha, sammastapyatmanam atmana, jahi shatrum mahabhavo kamarupam durasadam. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Thus, knowing oneself to be transcendental to the material senses, mind and intelligence, O mighty Arjuna, one should steady the mind by deliberate spiritual intelligence, that is Krishna consciousness, and thus by spiritual strength conquer the insatiable enemy known as lust. So this 3rd chapter of Bhagavad Gita is conclusively directive to Lord Krishna consciousness by knowing oneself as eternal servitor of the Supreme Personality of Godhead without considering impersonal voidness and the ultimate end. In the material existence of life, one is certainly influenced by propensities for lust and desire for dominating the resources of material nature. Desire for overlording and for sense gratification is the greatest enemy of the conditioned soul. But by the strength of Krishna consciousness, one can control the material senses, the mind, and the intelligence. How? Strength of Krishna consciousness. One may not give up work and prescribed duties all of a sudden, but by gradual developing Krishna consciousness, one can be situated in a transcendental position without being influenced by material senses and the mind, by steady intelligence directed towards one's pure identity. This is the sum total of this chapter. In the immature stage of material existence, philosophical speculations and artificial attempts to control the senses by the so-called practice of yogic positions can never help a man towards spiritual life. He must be trained in Krishna consciousness by higher intelligence. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purport to the 3rd chapter of Srimad Bhagavad Gita in the matter of karma yoga, or the discharge of one's prescribed duties in Krishna consciousness. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. So in conclusion here, Prabhupada tells us nicely that we must, and Krishna tells us nicely that we must be trained in Krishna consciousness by higher intelligence. What is higher intelligence? Engaging your senses in Krishna consciousness in spiritual activities rather than material activities. Because in essence, engaging your senses in material activities will bind you to this material world and give rise to lust, which is the greatest enemy. But if you engage your senses in spiritual activities, it will unbind you from this material world and it will develop love. Love and lust are two opposites. Love is you experience in the spiritual world, and lust is experienced here in the material world because it relates to attachment to sense gratification. Okay. Lust is a great symbol of sin, which causes bondage, suffering, and destruction, and Krishna calls lust an insatiable enemy because it cannot be satisfied. So, dear devotees, that ends the 3rd chapter of Bhagavad Gita as it is. Do we have any realizations? We can go through quickly. Shalina Mataji? We're just 2 minutes after 8 now, so we can just take some realizations quickly for conclusion.
I think, Mataji, our senses are not bad in itself, but the purpose of having them is to achieve God realization, and we've just allowed them to, we've permitted lust into it, so we need to seize our senses and use it purposefully.
Yes. Thank you, Shalina. Veronica?
Hey, Krishna, when you spoke about, Krishna is a walking dictionary, I just thought to myself, it's so amazing that those terminologies, when man professes to be a walking dictionary, where Krishna is the original walking dictionary. It's like, for me, it was like so intriguing. I never thought about it like that,
Yes.
It's so amazing, the literacy behind what Krishna has to say.
Yeah. I mean, look at all the purports of the verses in Bhagavad Gita. Krishna is speaking, right, to Arjuna. And every time he speaks, did you all take note of all the analogies Krishna has been using all along?
That's
a
so
lot in
amazing.
chapter 3, a lot in chapter 3 and chapter 2 as well, and we'll see more. Yeah. So Krishna is not just a walking dictionary, he's the origin of the dictionary. He's the origin of cause of all causes. That's what it's meant in Brahma Samhita when Lord Brahma says, Sarva Karana Karanam. He's the cause of all causes, he's the source of creation.
It's just like so
Yeah,
amazing.
it is amazing. Huh? Thank you.
Thank
Mati
you.
Mataji? Anything from you?
Yes, Mataji, is chapter 3 is about controlling the senses. Like
It's about
last
karma yoga. Yes.
Yeah. Yes, Mataji. Thank you, Mataji.
Thank you. It's about action. How we link our action. Karma is action, and yoga is to link. How we link our action now to God consciousness. And And rightfully, and you're correct. Towards the end, Krishna starts speaking a lot about the senses and how we dovetail our actions and engage our senses in God consciousness. Yeah, so it's about controlling your senses in a correct way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mataji.
Okay, who's next? Paramatma Prabhu?
Hare Krishna Mataji. And Mataji, Srila Prabhupada was telling us very clearly that there's every chance of falling down due to the agitated mind. So we're very fortunate that he built ISKCON, and ISKCON, there's so much of services that we can be engaged in Krishna consciousness. So I think we should take advantage of that and we won't fall down. He's given us the Bhagavad Gita, devotees, and these unlimited services that you can engage in the temple. So I think that's something that we can take from this chapter, how to be engaged in Krishna service, which is Krishna consciousness. Thank you, Mataji.
Thank you. That's a valid point. So it's coming down to the same point, our basis, right? Devotional service. Okay. Anybody else want to say anything? Risha Mataji, you want to say anything? Feeling confident to share something without any pressure, then you can. And Bharti, you as well? Bharti and Riyaz? Anything from your side? Concluded this chapter now. Okay, thank you. It's the electronic hand there. All right, so let's move on to Nashingadev Pranams. I'm going to share my screen again. And who wants to sing today? Anybody want to sing Nashingadev Pranams?
I can sing if you want me to. Anybody else?
Up to you all. Anybody who wants to sing?
I'll sing then.
Okay, sing. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Thanks, Veronica.
जय नृसिंहदेव भगवान की जय, नृसिंह प्रणाम की जय। हरे कृष्णा।
Hare Krishna. Om Namo Om Vishnupada Paramahansa Parivargacharya Stotra. His Divine Grace of Charanara Rinda Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Namo Om Vishnupada Paramahansa Parivargacharya Stotra. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srila Saripurna. Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shyama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham Mathura Dham Mayapur Jagannath Puri Pandharpur Arvade Kurukshetra Ayodhya Dwarika Dham Ki Jai. Shri Ganga Mai Ki Jai, Yamuna Mai Ki Jai, Bhakti Devi Tulsi Devi Maharani Ki Jai, Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai, Nitai Gaura Premanande Hari Hari Bol. All glories to the same old devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to the same old devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to the same old devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada, Vandikalpatarubhyascha, Vipasindubhya evacha, Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha, Anantakoti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Okay, thank you, dear devotees, for tolerating an extra 10 minutes or so. I know we started a bit late. Apologies for that as well. So congratulations and well done to everybody. We have now, with the blessings of Srila Prabhupada and the Lord, we have successfully completed the first 3 chapters of Bhagavad Gita. And next week we'll start on chapter 4. So let's be ready for that. Till next week. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Krishna, thank you, Mataji.
Thank you very much. Beautiful
Hare Krishna.
class.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.